It's right on the 9 o'clock hour, so I guess we will get started. We're going to do things a little bit different today. We like to shake it up a bit. And so today we aren't going to just necessarily throw a bunch of slides out to you and show, you should not be spending more than 15 to 20% on transportation. But we're just going to answer some of those really common questions we get and get it a little bit more personal so you can relate to it a little bit better. So Tina, we get calls all the time about just in general, finance questions in general. So Tina, you being a credit counselor, how much debt do you think too much debt is? That's a pretty common question we get. How much debt is too much debt? What would you, if someone came or called up and asked that question, what would your answer be?
Well, it probably would be an answer that they didn't really want to hear. It would be, it depends, because you have to look at, what's going on in your life. What are you using the debt for? And is it something that it's maintainable? And also, then we'd have to run the numbers, because there are some different things that we could look at that's good debt and bad debt. And I think you had some stuff to go through. It's a little bit more specific.
Yeah, I know we're not going to really throw out the numbers. I did say we're not going to throw out the slides with the numbers on them, but it is important to kind of keep the numbers in your mind, at least the percentages in your mind, so you're not just like, going way over limits here. Usually we recommend for non-mortgage debt, which would be credit cards, cars, things like that, 20% of your net income or less. So we want to see 20% or less. And for total debt, which includes the house, which is mortgage debt included in there, we're looking at 36% gross. Now, those are some general ideas. That's like household national household averages. But we also have to look at some other things. For instance, credit cards. It's not a bad thing to have a mortgage. It's not a bad thing to even have a car loan. I have a car loan. I'm a credit counselor, financial advisor, but the car loan rate that I got was so much lower than what I was earning in my account. I had the money saved up for the car. I could have paid it, but I'm like, why? I'm earning more than what I'm paying out. So I'm not saying that any debt is too much. Some financial coaches suggest you should have no debt. Any debt's bad debt. And I don't agree with that necessarily, because if we run into a situation, and I'll throw this out there, my grandmother and grandpa, when they didn't have any debt, and upon his death, we were trying to get my grandmother a credit card because she was an authorized user. And with them having no debt, they really had no ongoing credit history. And it was very difficult. We had to end up getting her a secured credit card. And while she had the money to do that, having no debt kind of had an adverse reaction, an adverse effect on her overall financial plan. But usually for credit cards, credit card debt's not good to have. Car loan, mortgage, okay. I would say you can go out on a limb and do that. But for credit card debt, we typically like to see zero. However, if zero is not possible, we do like to see credit usage 30% or less. So, and when we look at credit usage, that is your limit of the card versus your actual balance on that card. And we like to see it on a per card basis and a total basis. So if you have, for instance, a $10,000 limit on two different cards, having $2,500 on each card, you have a 25% usage, right? But if we put all of that onto one card, so you have $5,000 balance on one card that has a $10,000 limit, even though you have total 25% usage, you still have 50% on that one card. So you have to really look at it and maneuver things around. One of the things that you can ask yourself is, when you're looking at, or a couple of things you can ask yourself when you're looking at how much, or am I carrying too much debt, is, are you only making the minimum payments on those cards? If you're only making minimum payments and you're carrying credit card debt, you may have too much debt. You should be able to pay those off. Are you skipping paying certain bills? Are you paying bills late to be able to pay other bills? That is definitely a sign of having too much debt. If your credit cards are maxed out, or what we call, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that is another blaring red flag or flashing light that yes, you may have too much debt. If you're being constrained by your payments, then you definitely have too much debt.
So when you have that much debt, what's the best way? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to pay them off, right?
Yeah, you can pick a card, you can roll dice and say, if it lands on, one, I'm going to pay this one. If it lands on two, I'm going to pay this one. The common ways that we look at paying off debt, the most common are usually the snowball and the avalanche. And the snowball and avalanche, and I think these kind of get misconstrued because we always hear, the snowball effect of paying off debt, and we tend to think of that being the taking the highest interest rate card and just tackling that. And actually, it's kind of the opposite. The avalanche is taking the highest rate of interest and tackling that one, making minimum payments on everything, and then any other amount that you can put towards debt would be on that highest rate card. And that's typically going to, spreadsheet wise, when you run the numbers, that's typically going to give you the greatest savings. It's going to be more effective in paying off your debt. But we tend to hear the snowball effect and we think of that as well. Or we just think that that is a way, either the highest rate, the lowest balance, whatever it is, that's snowballing. But really with the snowball, you're taking the lowest balance. And whichever one of these may work for you is whichever one you're going to actually do. And so, and it's really on a individual basis, because if I have a $15,000 debt with a higher rate of interest, and I have a couple little $500 cards, emotionally, to keep me going, it may be better for me to pay off those smaller cards. And then it shows some momentum. Does that make sense? I see that progress. And so it keeps me motivated. And then I can divert all of that additional payment, whether the minimum payments and the extra amount I was using, to then tackle that highest rate debt. Now, if I have a lot that are equal, that may not make sense.
Right. I think one of the things that you talked about, the emotion of it, how you feel about it. I think sometimes if you there are some people who they made a decision to pay off all this debt, and then they're putting all their money toward their debt, and then they're getting into a place where, oh my gosh, I don't have enough to pay the bills because I'm putting it all toward the debt, and then you end up using your credit cards for other things. So you can find yourself in a cycle if you're not careful. So you need to make sure, like you've mentioned before, not to spread your money too thin among the various debts. Just have a focus and know that it's part of the plan. And it's just it doesn't have to be you have to get this all paid off in a certain number of months. But if you have the plan, even though it's not paid down as quickly as maybe you would like, you're at least working toward a goal, and you can just focus on, that month that you're chipping away at this, and you're not adding any additional debt to it. That's the other thing. So
I think a lot of us get to where, especially when we, receive our paychecks, we get this affordable ambition. And it's like, I am going to this month, I just got my check. I'm going to really tackle this. I'm going to put $500 on this card and really knock it out. We can do it in 3 months and then as those days tick away until your next paycheck, that's when you're kind of like, man, I didn't think this through very well, And so I think we have great intention when it comes to really tackling this stuff. But I think sometimes the execution is a little ambitious. So like you said, don't spread it too thin. And when we also talk about spreading it too thin, it's, if we're trying to pay off debt, yes, we're paying it across maybe 3 cards. Let's say 3 cards. We're paying it amongst 3 cards. And instead of doing that and spreading it over all 3 cards evenly, pick one, and of that card, that one card that you want to tackle that, and then move to the next one. And whether that's going to be your lower balance, or the highest interest rate, or if it's just one that you're like, this is bugging me to death, then tackle that one first. And that does provide that motivation, and keeps you going. And I think that's the biggest thing, is if you're motivated, if you see accomplishments, that's typically when you're going to continue that process.
And I think a lot of times using a calculator, like in the money guide, my money guide that we have on our website, or just any kind of online calculator, being able to see where that is. And I think that they usually do that. They'll do it automatically, or they'll ask, what you want to have done. So we have regular credit calculators, credit card calculators on our site, as well as the money guide program, which is very good.
And another thing is, we always suggest using SMART goals. And SMART's the acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. And that measurable is a big part of it. If you see that, if you're being able to track the progress of that, that's what, the measurable, that's the M in that. So we can really look to see where we are on that timeline of when we want to have certain things paid off.
All right. So what are some other things that you should look at when thinking about managing your money and your debt, other than, not spending on the credit cards and just basic budgeting? What are some other life things that we could think about?
Well, one of the things that, and I know it's kind of grim, but we want to look at and plan for if you lost your job, or if your spouse loses their job. And we kind of, we really hammer on this a lot when we talk about budgeting, and we're like, look at discretionary. I mean, I don't care if you're not really tracking a budget to pay off debt. I'm just saying, in general, track a budget of some sort so you can distinguish between discretionary and non-discretionary needs and wants. And that way you can very easily flip a switch if something happens. That between, obviously you're going to have to pay the house, you're going to have food, probably don't want to run around naked, so you're going to have some clothing. Now your clothing budget may be reduced, but at least that these are the things that I'm going to necessarily have to have: insurance, food, prescriptions, housing, transportation. You want to have your car payment so you can find another job. So you have those, but then you also have things that maybe aren't necessary. Maybe you can reduce the cell phone bill. You can knock off the unlimited data, or canceling Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus, or any type of subscription plans. I mean, there's a lot of subscription plans where you pay monthly, quarterly, annually for that auto renew. Most of them, in fact, are set up, even on the annual ones, are set up for auto renew. And so take a look at those and see, and I'm sorry, if you're in the midst of losing a job and your life being turned upside down, you may not realize that you signed up for brilliant.org and it's an annual subscription, 3 months ago. You're not going to say, oh, I need to remember this. And so, having that down in your list and knowing that this is something I can definitely cancel if I need to is certainly something that is going to be helpful. And that goes for either side. We always suggest having the distinguish between the discretionary and non-discretionary. And we also suggest having that emergency fund saved. And in the case of spouses where there's two incomes in the household, we usually say that the rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months worth of an emergency fund. But if, you can kind of lean more towards that 3 month if you're both working, because you typically aren't going to both lose your job at the same time, unless you work for the same company and they're cutting back or doing layoffs. So it's something to consider, how much needs to be saved or how much you're actually supplementing for. You may have one house, like one household that if one person lost their job, if they're living under, within their means or under their income, then losing a job may not affect that at all. So, you may want to have that emergency fund saved up for in case both of you lost the job, but to lose, one of them, it may not be as big of an issue.
So, one of the biggest parts of debt is, like we talked about already, mortgage. So how much of that, I mean, if we're looking at our debt in a whole, how much of that should we really be using? Like, how much should we be spending on a house? I mean, right now, people who are looking at homes are probably paying more than they would have if they would have bought last year.
Yeah, I think we have seen an increase in values of homes. I talked to a client yesterday that lives in Georgia, and she said, she was in the midst of looking for a home. She started last year, but now she's kind of at a point to where her lease is going to be up. So she really needs to find one. And she said, it is just the market has exploded. And so you may be paying more for a house than you were before. And so that's definitely something to consider. Usually we suggest no more than 28% being dedicated for housing. One moment, please.
We have intermission for the.
Sorry about that. My dog was barking too much. But usually we say 28% for mortgage.
Of your income or of your total debt? Sorry.
For dedicated more towards, you can usually, the cutoff point when we're looking at mortgages, they don't want to see more than 28% of your income going towards. They're very feisty this morning. I'm sure you can hear them. No more than 28% of your income dedicated towards a mortgage payment. But I kind of have, when we've discussed in the past, when we've talked about household averages, we're saying, mortgage, if you're looking at household of your gross income, we're like, okay, 35% ish should, can be dedicated to housing, and transportation's like 15 to 20, and food's like 5 to 10, so you have all these percentages. But if you're not using some of those other percentages, you can kind of fill up some of those other buckets. You can borrow from one of the buckets. And it's just, really all we're looking at when we talk about debt management is don't spend more than you make. That's really what we're trying to do. And some people are just in that whole mindset, like, I need guidance of how much everyone's doing because I want to follow that path. So that's why we have these national averages, these national household averages. But it doesn't mean that that's what your household needs to do, because there's somehow, the average is the middle, right? So there's some that does a lot more, some that does a lot less. So when we look at housing, let's just look at an example. And I'm going to use, instead of John and Jane and John and Joe, and I'm just going to say Michelle and John, because that's much easier for me to use my own name and my spouse's. And so let's say Michelle and John are looking to purchase a house, and they have no other debt. They have no credit card debt. They have no student loan debt. They have no car loan debt. So they're pretty good. They're contributing to their retirement plans. They're maxing out any outside held retirement, Roth or IRA. So they're doing well. And of course, house market's up right now. So they are looking to buy a house, and they're going to have to pay a little bit more for it probably. And they can totally afford the 30-year note. That's going to remain, keep them under that 28%. But they can probably afford a little bit more because they don't have a car payment. They don't have a student loan payment. They don't have credit card payment. They don't have all of this other stuff. So if they decide, you know what, we just got another car. We usually drive our car 10 to 12, 15 years, who knows? What if we have some put back for that? What if we instead did a 15-year note? Now that 15-year note may put the payment a little bit over what the household national average suggests, but it's totally within their budget because they don't have all of this other debt. So it's one of those guidelines that you use, but it's not this is the absolute rule. You should never do this, because they're going to have a paid off house in 15 years, and then they can start looking at doing another car. If they're, saving that up as well, even a little bit of it, then they're definitely going to be ahead of the game on that. So I don't like to just say, this is what you have to do. It's always, here's a recommendation of how other people are doing it successfully, and take that advice how you will.
Right.
I mean,
and I think that's the important thing when you do have like a financial advisor, you have somebody who knows you, and that way if you go to your advisor and they know that you really enjoy like investing in property, and they have this understanding about you, and they see you maybe deterring from what you like because it's the cool thing to do now. It's like, I want to put everything in Bitcoin or something. And then they know, okay, this is what's going to work for you and what's going to work for your life. And if, especially if they have an understanding about what their retirement plan is going to be like. And that kind of leads us into if you have credit card debt and different debts like this, should you still be putting away even for your retirement if you're farther away from your retirement?
That is a good question. Some people want to, instead of putting anything away for retirement, even if they have a mortgage, they're like, we've got to tackle this. And I don't know how many times we've had people come in that are like, yeah, I think I want to take money from my IRA and pay off my mortgage. And this is obviously, after they reach the age of 59 and a half, where it's not going to, incur a penalty. But they say, this is just really bothering me. I have this, $20,000 or $30,000 left on the mortgage. I'm getting ready to retire. I would like to pay that off, so I don't have to worry about that. And our question is like, what's the mortgage, interest rate? That's the first thing I ask. What's the mortgage interest rate? How much do you owe? And if the mortgage rate is, usually we kind of do under 4%. If it's under 4%, it may not financially on a spreadsheet likely will not make sense, because the average earnings on a stock, in the stock market is 10%. And so if you're paying off 4%, saving 4 at the expense of 10, that doesn't make sense for a financial standpoint. Spreadsheet wise, number wise, emotionally, it may make perfect sense. So it's hard to say what that is. Now, if it's credit card debt, that's a different story. And so that's something that we don't like to see, credit card debt. I still would like, for savings, if you're looking at, should I do one thing or my retirement? That one thing depends. I definitely like to see an emergency fund in place before retirement. So I would.
Yeah, we get into the cycle that we talked about before.
Yeah.
So if you've got the credit card debt and you don't have anything in savings for those little emergencies, then you go back to your old habits of credit cards.
Exactly. So you're going to be tapping on the credit cards that may already be maxed out or close to, simply so you can put money and divert taxes on a 401k. So, and it's kind of hard to get to that. It's kind of hard to get to that 401k. Some of them will allow for loans, but there's a little fee with it. You're kind of paying yourself back. So, but you may have to wait 30, 60 days. I don't know, how quickly can you get paperwork filled out and funded? So definitely having stuff set aside for an emergency, absolutely first by far. Then if you want to, if you have an employer matching 401k, and then you're looking at, okay, I can match this amount and pay off debt. If that's feasible, and it's not, because I mean, let's face it, it may not be that much. It may be 2 or 3 or 4% that they match. You can probably get away with that. And because that's free money. If you're going to double down on your money, I would like to see that, and then divert the rest to credit card. If that is going to be too much of a strain, then absolutely don't do that. You know, it's kind of an individual situation. What you can do is, with that emergency savings, put it into a Roth. If you're eligible to contribute to a Roth, you can use that Roth as your emergency fund, and it kind of hybrids as your retirement account as well. And so if that's one of the things that, you know, you're like, well, I want to save for retirement, but I also want to, you know, build up an emergency fund, and I want to pay off debt. If you have that amount saved up in an emergency fund, you kind of already have some of that can, if you don't use it, you can then use it for your emergencies or for your retirement. So you can definitely hybrid between those. But if you can't contribute and do the debt payoff, I would definitely suggest first emergency fund, second paying off the debt, and having a SMART goal that's time-based, where you can say in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, this will be paid off. We're really going to tackle it, and then divert those assets to retirement. Because again, it doesn't make sense to pay 20, 25, 30% on a credit card to get that 4% matched, and, you know, to in that 401k. So I definitely like to see anyone get free money, but if you're not able to do that and pay off extra debt in a reasonable amount of time, concentrate on the debt, then circle back around for the retirement.
Very cool. I just put in the chat in case anybody watching has any questions.
And actually, I think what I'll do, Tina, is I'm just going to flip on the mics
Okay,
and allow everyone to talk. So feel free to blurt out anything that you want to ask.
So you can.
Oh, and I did have a tip and trick in here. We had a couple that we discussed. One of the things that we had seen and we talked about during debt management last year was removing your credit card number from your shopping site. It is so easy to, you know, even on my phone, I can go to Amazon and I don't have to type in anything else. I just have to remember those 3 numbers. That's it. I don't have to go get my purse or my wallet or go to the next room. 3 numbers, I can do that. And it makes it so easy to buy something. And if you have that removed and don't save that information, it makes it more difficult for you to have, you know, to have to go to the next room. And I don't know how many times I've gone back and I'm like, oh, I don't want to get up now and do that. And then I go back to that site a month or 2 months later, and it's in my shopping cart still. And I'm like, I so did not need that. You know, it's obviously, if it's still in there and I don't have it, I don't need it.
It's kind of the digital version of freezing your credit card in water. It's in ice in your freezer.
True. And I think we talked about that, the freezing the credit card, but also taking a kind of a breather, you know, a budget breather, and say, okay, before I make a purchase over, set the dollar amount, $100. Before I make a purchase of anything 100 or more, I'm going to wait 2 days or 3 days or 5 days. And then anything less than that, I will wait, you know, 1 to 3 days. So you're not immediately buying it. It gives you that time to thaw out, that card to thaw out. So
a cooling off period.
Yeah, definitely.
About it. Yes. And I think the idea of, do I really need this, or do I already have this? And we're going to be playing with that in the coming time. I was looking for my other glasses to see if I can still wear my other glasses. It's a different prescription, but I was like, oh, I know I saved them, and I was looking for them, and I found a little thing of Vaseline. And just a couple weeks ago, my husband was like, we need Vaseline. I'm like, I'm sure we have it. I'm sure we have some, but we didn't know where it was. So he went and bought another one. So of course now we have two. And, you know, that's one of the things of knowing where things are, and you probably already have it somewhere. So that's one way you can keep yourself from buying things is you might already have something that you can use. And that helps us with, you know.
Definitely taking a mental inventory of what you have and just kind of keeping that in there. I don't know. I totally, if it's not on, like I have Alexa, and I don't want to say her name too loud because then she'll ask what I need. But anytime we walk through the house and we need something, well, you know, we need to add to shopping list. And so if it's not on that, you know, if it's not on the shopping list, we probably don't need it. And if we run in and see, oh, well, this is on sale, do we need that? Do we already have that? And just because it's on sale doesn't mean it's you need it. So
Right. And I run into that with I try to use my credit cards in a good way. I'm their worst nightmare because I pay them off monthly. But I like getting the points and miles and et cetera, et cetera. And one of my cards has a way, if you buy certain things online, you get, you know, money back. Well, if it's something that I already ordered, I'm okay with using it. You know, it's not like a spontaneous purchase. For example, my American Express card, it was allowing, I would get, I think, $20 back if I ordered from Sunbasket. Well, at the same time, because I used to be a Sunbasket subscriber, I received a thing from Sunbasket saying, "We miss you. We will give you $15 off a week from your purchases." So I doubled those up and ended up getting, you know, my meals for a couple of weeks. And also, it's considered a grocery purchase, which I get 6% cash back on. So for those kind of things, you can have fun, and it's, you know, you're putting it on your tab, but you're also making money from it. So that's kind of a fun thing if you can manage it and make sure that you're paying it off completely without paying interest.
Yeah.
You know,
just smart shopping.
That's what they try to get you to do, because, you know, if I have to pay interest, it doesn't make it worth it at all.
Right.
But if I don't have to pay interest, then it's worth it.
It's all about smart shopping. Shopping smart. Well, do we have any questions, comments, concerns before we let y'all get back to your very rainy, windy day? Oh, it's not windy anymore. Rainy day.
Do you have oh, there we go. There's Walter.
Yeah, Walter.
I want to verify that your sequence is emergency fund, credit card debt, and then retirement savings.
Typically, yes, unless you can afford to, like if your employer matches, and most employers aren't matching like 10%. I mean, some of them may still, we've seen some, but usually it's like 2 to 4% match. And so if you can afford to, if they're matching any amount in that 401k, if it's possible to get that free money, go ahead and divert, you know, emergency always first, but divert part of that over to retirement and then tackle debt. But if that stretches you too thin, then definitely bypass the retirement, focus on the debt.
Okay. And the emergency fund, and I'm sure you've covered this in previous sessions, you're looking at 6 months. You're looking at being able to live 6 months without a paycheck. Is
yes,
that correct?
3 to 6 months, depending. And that's kind of the typical rule of thumb, 3 to 6 months, and more towards the 3 months if it's a 2-income household, more towards 6 months if it's a 1-income household, but it's taking into account all income. So if you have retirement, pension, Social Security, any of that can supplement whatever that non-discretionary expenses. So not your total expenses. Let's say that it's $5,000 a month total living expenses, and 2,500 of that is non-discretionary. You're only having to cover the 2,500 because you can cancel all this other stuff and kind of, you know, Netflix, Hulu, whatever, but you're having to cover that 2,500 of the non-discretionary expenses. And if you have 2,000 in Social Security, that's not going away. If you have 500 in a pension, that's not, so you're covered. You're covered with that. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have emergency savings because you have that flooring already, but it would be a good idea to have some, some cushion there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Do you have any more questions? If not, we will, I guess, see you guys next month. What are we talking about next month, Tina?
That is a good question. I was more concerned about finding out, telling everybody that we're going to consider going back to the old way of doing these meetings, having them more as meetings rather than webinars, because we can't see your faces. Right? Are we still going to do that?
Yeah, I think what we'll end up doing with that, we're trying to be compliant as much as possible of how Texas State Securities Board and SEC likes to have things. And so what we may end up doing with that is kind of having, if it's a generic question that, anyone can use, then, or anyone can benefit from, we'll have those to where anyone, we can turn on the mics for everyone then. And then if it's a more specific question, after we shut the recording down, we may be able to answer that more specific question. And that way we can still not have to worry about compliance issues, but still be able to see your smiling faces.
All right. So next time, this series this year, we're being mindful about things. We're really thinking about things. So next time we're being mindful about choosing your future leisure wear. And so this is kind of a fun way of looking at what are your plans for retirement? Are you going to be sporting a tracksuit, or are you going to be wearing a beekeeper's outfit? Are you going to be digging in the ground at your winery? I don't know, whatever you're wearing, how you prepare for your retirement now will help you determine how you'll live in the future, and if you will be able to do those things in your retirement years. So that's what we'll be talking about next time. That'll be May 26th. Same time, same bat time. We may change the link, so if you registered in advance, we will probably have to have you re-register again. I'll put those on the newsletter to sign in.
So if we don't have any more questions, I look forward to seeing you guys next time. And if you do think of a question that, maybe later on this afternoon or tomorrow, shoot us an email. We're happy to answer those for you. So until next time, guys, take care.